Hello and welcome to the Functional Health Podcast with Ben Atkinson. I'm delighted to be joined by Marek Doyle to talk about men's hormonal health with a key focus on testosterone. The average testosterone levels in men have continued to decline since the 1960s, and barely anyone is talking about this, why it's happening, the implications, and what we can do about it. Marek has been on the podcast before, and in this episode we go off on many tangents, but really they all link back to the same thing, which is how men's hormonal health is derailed, what can happen as a result of this, and how we can get it back on track. This is a lengthy conversation. Please fast forward 20 minutes if you want to get into the topic, and I really hope you find this useful. So let's get into it. Marek, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be back.
It is a pleasure to have you on again, sir. How have you been?
Yeah, it's been, the usual ups and downs, with thinking that I'm soon going to be up to date on my admin, and then finding out that after spending a few more evenings holding a sticky baby in front of a fan, that actually, I'm a little bit behind again. But, these are all solvable in time, as we see. So, I'm all good.
Good. I'm glad. I know we were speaking a bit before as like how we coped in the heat. I feel like there will be a change, hopefully in the near future, where everywhere accommodates air conditioning or something similar.
Well, yeah, it's of course that usual scenario, like when we get once in a decade snow and everybody says, look at the other countries, they know how to deal with it. But of course, they are used to it. We don't tend to get that. So, I'm one of the people that has actually now bought an air conditioning unit for next time. I couldn't get one for love nor money during the incident. But, I wasn't even worried until I realised, you know what? It turns out that babies don't sleep that well with the heat. So, when it comes to babies and sleeping, I'll happily throw money at that problem.
Yeah, I can completely understand that. I can only imagine how hard that was at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure there was millions of us around the country in the same boat, so I'll take some solace in that. But nonetheless, I'm very, very committed to avoiding it next time. I'm sure there will be a next time, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm sure there will. I mean, I couldn't go out in it because I think I have Scottish heritage and very pale skin. So, yeah.
Yeah,
melanin is not my friend.
I didn't try. So, just sat here in my office, which is a summer house. So pretty good at trapping the heat.
Yeah.
Again, a little bit of sweat, detoxification. We move on.
Didn't hurt anyone. As long as you hydrate, you're all good.
Yeah, well, exactly that. So, a bit of salt in the water.
Got to be done. That's a trick that people aren't aware of.
Well, I did think about that. I put on an Instagram post just to say, reminder, just stick a bit of salt in the water. That will solve a ton of problems. And I thought, well, that would be helpful. I'm sure that will help some people. And it seemed to be something that really captured the imagination of a lot of people. So it was clearly quite relevant.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing. I mean, this is not very relevant to the topic of the show, but I think it's relevant nonetheless, considering the heat. I noticed when I put salt in my water just a little bit during the day, I actually drink less, and I think it's just more hydrating because I filter my water, so I'm taking away most of the minerals out of it anyway. It's probably important to remineralize it. I imagine that's what we used to. Certainly, our ancestors were used to.
Well, yeah, it's interesting how we're constantly told, make sure you drink enough water, but to get the water into the cells, which is ultimately what we want to do, we need to be able to move it there, and we need potassium to get it into the cells, we need sodium to hold it outside of the cells. If we don't have those there, well, it turns out osmosis is a thing, and we're just not going to be able to retain it. It's going to go straight to the bladder. And that's, of course, the experience of millions of people over the last couple of weeks, is that, the more they drink, the more they pee, and they're just constantly thirsty because, we're going to sweat, especially in that heat, which means we're losing those very same minerals that we need to hold it. So, yeah, there's a little something that could be taken to improve that messaging that's just thrown at people. Yes, drink the water, but also take some steps so you got a fair chance of holding on to it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't understand why it's not more well known than than I feel it should be.
I think that can apply for a whole ton of things that we talk about.
Yeah.
Some things are naturally pretty complex in the body, and then of course there's all these things that actually aren't that complex. But yeah, I mean, that's where we could look into, do the people who influence public policy and messaging have any qualifications or even basic competence in these areas? I think we can safely say, if we glance at the rates of obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases, heart disease, after people avidly integrate the recommendations they're given, I think we can safely summarize the level of expertise behind those, and that's none. And a lot of it is ignorance, of course, and there's the financial interests, which is a brand new subject which we probably shouldn't get into, but yeah, all in all, if somebody from some governmental health authority says good morning to me, I want to go outside and check.
Yeah. That's quite funny. I'm going to use that. I'm definitely going to use that again.
It's not the first time I've said it, I'll be honest.
No, I can tell. It was definitely rehearsed. I get it though.
Yeah, guilty.
So on to the topic of the show. So it's great to have you on again. Last time we spoke about thyroid disease, I think more of a focus on hypothyroidism. But today I would love to speak to you about men's health, because I recognised I've done several podcasts now focusing on women's health, and I'll link to those in the show notes for anyone. But I've neglected men's health or men's general health, and which maybe is neglected in the mainstream as opposed to men's mental health, for example, which I think is getting a lot of attention right now. What do you think about that? Is that a fair assertion?
Yeah, I always wonder how much my perspective on these things has any connection to the bigger picture, because by definition, I end up hanging around with people in this industry, or more accurately in a specific area of this industry, who are more likely to place a focus on these things. So equally, the conversations I have with members of the public, well, this is a very select group of the members of the public, those that have decided to come and see me. So naturally, their focus and their interest, their knowledge, their exposure to these ideas may well not reflect what's going on out there. Either way, yeah, it does feel like there is some very obvious increased discussions about men's health and the need to recognize that men are human as well, with central nervous systems that are just as vulnerable to stress as if we had XX chromosomes. So I think that there's definitely some movement there. But yeah, sometimes, as with many other subjects, you can get into that black and white thinking of, we need to focus on mental health rather than recognizing this quite powerful interplay between physiological health and mental health, because it's very much a two-way street. So yeah, hopefully the discourse will gradually move down that route, and we can start looking at what does this human being, male or female, need in order to achieve the improvements that they're after, which should always involve some sort of recognition of the physiology, the psychology, which can't really be separated.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. I was going to say, you were so right, and I agree with you so much that the physiological health and mental health is inextricably linked, because inexplicably, one of the two. Because basically, if we have an issue with testosterone, for example, or gut issues or systemic inflammation, we know that that is going to have effects on the brain. I think there was many articles now talking about the brain on fire and how systemic inflammation, especially brain inflammation, can cause a whole host of conditions, not just mental health, but other conditions as well.
No, 100%. And I do feel like that's getting some recognition, but I don't see any application of it. At this point, we're at the concept stage where after what feels like a couple of decades of, don't worry about that, just take what we're giving you, we're now getting to the point that, no, it's a really important issue for which we're not necessarily going to integrate, but we will now acknowledge it. So I guess that's progress of sorts.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think it's just going to take time. I think what you see in clinic, it just takes ages to actually become public knowledge.
Well, it is, yeah. And they do say that it takes 40 years for any paradigm shift that's revealed in the science to actually end up getting into frontline. And unfortunately, that seems to be absolutely spot on, really. So, yeah, luckily, I think we're seeing the public at large taking matters more into their own hands, more so than ever before. And I think that now there is not really such thing as the NHS and anything else but spirit. That's probably going to accelerate how people take care of their health, because, yeah, there is something to be said for waiting 4 weeks for a 3.5-minute appointment whereby you're now put on a waiting list to see somebody who will then put you on another waiting list to see somebody else. Sounds like a great way to keep yourself entertained if there's nothing else to do. But most people, they want something that they can action now that A, makes sense, and B, will actually deliver some sort of results. And so, yeah, I do feel like there's a shift there. As I said, it may well be simply the area of the world and the people that I speak to which aren't reflective of society at large. But yeah, I do think we are seeing that movement. People are starting to question long-held dogma purely because if that dogma is a one-way ticket to this whole host of neurodegenerative diseases and essentially, living without the vitality or the energy or the brain sharpness that we need to live the lives we want, well, how long can we remain patient? Passive. So I guess we'll keep our eye on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you also made such a valuable point there with regards to, I guess, living in an echo chamber, right? We always speak to people that almost agree with us, have the same opinions, go to the same conferences together, and therefore we agree with what the speaker is saying most of the time. And that's dangerous in a way, because we're constantly getting confirmation that we're right without actually seeing the other side of the argument necessarily.
Oh, definitely. And it's funny how even in what we would call this sort of functional space, which again is something that seems to be ever more accessible to the public, which is great, but does still feel like it's handicapped in many ways for that exact reason you mentioned, in that often people aren't doing their independent searches of the literature to actually build a more detailed picture. They're not actually uncovering the full picture. They are simply taking good ideas that are delivered, but those good ideas were based on the good ideas of somebody else, and they end up being channeled into avenues that may well not necessarily have the flexibility to be useful for a whole lot of people who don't fit into the boxes which we're using for leverage to deliver this support. What about people that have trialed this highly rational, well-developed protocol and got nowhere with it.
Mm-hmm.
What about those guys? There is not yet a sufficient culture of examining things from up close and from a bird's eye view, which always reveals such clear avenues we can take. It always shows us the areas in which we can score the victories we need to make the difference. But yeah, it does still seem to be that there's too much dependency on the so-called authorities in our space and their ideas, and so often practitioners and individuals alike are often caught in that situation where they have to decide, do I trust this expert and hope that if I employ this protocol for the next 6 months that will actually indeed work? Or do I trust the other expert who's saying something different? And it feels like a fork in the road with two options, and there's just so many more options. And that's one of the main focal points of my academy courses, which is, well, why don't we look at the principles that apply in all these cases so that we can now know ahead of time whether this person has a fair chance of responding to Dr. X's idea or practitioner Y's protocols. We're no longer having to cross our fingers and hope that their protocol is the right protocol. And instead we can take the principles, we can undertake the modifications that are called for based on the data that we've got for this person, based on a comprehensive screening process which tells us where the obstacles are. And maybe there's still some fleshing out of the models we come back with. Maybe we know where we're going to win, but we still need to yield more information as to the specific steps in those pathways. Maybe we'll have surprises and needs to modify the support after we resolve an obstacle and switch things on and suddenly place a bit more pressure downstream. But yeah, that's where I think we as a functional health community are looking at taking things up. It's not a case of doing another course and getting an even better probiotic or finding an even more powerful form of the same mineral. What if we could actually take a step back and start asking better questions so that, we already have a more accurate idea of exactly what does this individual need and piece it together in a way that's suitable for them. It's staged according to what layer we're working on at that particular time, rather than simply trying to transplant a protocol, which is no doubt a good protocol, very well thought out, subject to decades of research, but to try and just squeeze that protocol into their lives is such a limiting way to go about it. So yes, there's reason for optimism, but there's also enough opportunities for my palm to meet my forehead.
Quick pause. We're thrilled to say that our sponsor for this podcast today is Human People. Human People is a personalised health platform set up by functionally trained doctors and nutritionists right here in the UK, and they're on a mission to give you a healthier, longer and more productive life. When we start to feel a bit tired, get aches, pains, or brain fog, it can be a challenge to work out the root cause of that problem and how we can solve it. Well, Human People are offering a solution. They empower you to better understand your health issues and use AI technology to provide clear, actionable steps to help you meet your goals. Choose between blood, DNA, and gut tests to look for common nutritional deficiencies and important gene SNPs, and get your personalised recommendations reviewed by a doctor, and all for less than a price of your daily coffee. The quality of their supplements is excellent, and their recyclable packs means no more plastic bottles filling up your cupboard. Better for you, better for the planet. Head over to humanpeople.co/functionalhealth and use code functionalhealth, all one word, at checkout to get 10% off any of their tests. And if you purchase any of their bundles, you'll get 6 months of a high-quality omega-3 supplement absolutely free. Feel better, live healthier, and start your journey today at humanpeople.co/functional health. Back to the show. Yeah, you hit on such a valuable point. Like, just because a protocol is well thought out doesn't mean it will work for said person, patient X, because sometimes there's a bottleneck, a biochemical bottleneck. I always think, like, if you think of a sand egg timer, just because you add more sand in one side doesn't make it any quicker. Do you know what I mean? That is, there's a constant stream. So yeah, but trying to explain that to someone, sometimes it doesn't quite get through. So if you take a supplement which, let's say, meant to improve cognition, it might not necessarily, if you don't have the ability to utilize it well, or the pathway is not working as well as it should, which I think is undervalued.
Well, yeah, and of course, to bring that back to the subject matter, which I'm sure we'll get onto sooner or later. Yeah, we'll often see people quote the research and say, well, look, boron has this incredible effect on testosterone. In actual fact, you can provide boron and it's going to enhance testosterone by X%. Well, that's all well and good, but what if that person is subject to a raging infection?
Yeah.
Not going to do anything. Not anything noticeable anyway. Or, what if somebody is subject to a huge stress load, be it workload, be it lack of sleep, be it long gaps between meals, or, as is most common, that sensory stress, as in the stress that's trapped within the body long term, whatever it may be. Well, if their heart rate variability is on the floor, you're not going to see them respond in the way that somebody else who may be in otherwise decent shape but is a little short on boron. That's two very, very different outcomes that are entirely predictable. So yeah, this idea of the paradigm that underscores evidence-based medicine, that if we just do large enough sampling, then we will get the one true answer, the specific response that each supplement provides in a population. And yeah, okay, maybe there is a 29.5% increase in free testosterone on average within that group of college students that actually volunteered for the trial. But how does that actually tie in to the individual that we're working in, who isn't part of that population, who has totally different schedule, totally different obstacles, different burdens on their system? But yeah, is now expecting a 29.5% increase in free testosterone because that's what the literature said was the average response in a group of 12 unrepresentative human beings. So yeah, great proof of concept, tells us what can be done, but it won't tell us who is going to respond to it and when. That's our job to quantify that. And we can do that, but we have to ask that question.
Exactly. And you were right. We are going dancing around the topic at hand, so let's dive into it. Men's health. I recently thought, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, because men seem to be more affected by COVID-19 than others, and it made me think, are men more prone to viral infections than others? And I looked it up, and it looks like we are. Right, we are more prone to viral infections and more severe outcomes from viral infections. But then women, and these are the only two stats which I can recall, are more prone to things like autoimmune conditions and things of that nature. And then later in life, osteoporosis, postmenopause, and things like that. What health complaints or health conditions have you seen come up in clinic as they relate to men's health?
So yeah, when we talk about men's health, we are often very much in swinging the testosterone conversation straight away. And of course, testosterone is a really big deal. But I think what is fascinating is to consider those changes between the two sexes, whether we look at it from an immune perspective, because testosterone is hugely active in the immune system. We often consider it to be all about sex drive and maybe motivation, confidence, mood, etc. And yeah, it definitely does all those things. But also, it's a powerful anti-inflammatory. It's powerful enough to have disease-modifying effects in a whole number of conditions, like rheumatoid arthritis. There's studies that demonstrate remission just from correcting low testosterone. So, yeah, that's a big deal. But equally, yeah, when looking at how might testosterone impact on men's health, well, then we're looking, into the central nervous system health. I think that's huge. Big two-way connection between testosterone and dopamine. Dopamine affects testosterone, testosterone affects dopamine. But then equally, health, the mechanics of the stress response has a big impact depending on our testosterone status. So, this is where testosterone's, it has a nice suppressive effect of interferon, which typically is a really helpful thing at baseline and very much ties into that reduced risk of autoimmunity, but does mean that your average male is just that little bit more vulnerable to viral infections. And these are the subtleties that play out. And so always worth considering when we've got somebody sat across the room from us, some of which, weirdly enough, are female and some of which, weirdly enough, are male. And so, one of many ways we can substratify them, but arguably we're substratifying here on the most powerful hormones that we know. And of course, when your average woman has about 1.0 nanomoles per litre, or at least that would be ideal, of testosterone, and a healthy man is going to have 20-something nanomoles of testosterone. That's a massive difference. So, straight away, it does pay to just give a little bit of consideration to, well, what impact is that likely to have?
Yes, 100%. And those figures that you mentioned, because we don't actually, I know we're focusing on men's health today, but testosterone in the 20-something mark, has that changed over time? Because I remember reading recently that something like testosterone levels, for example, my grandfather's would have been twice on average of mine at my age, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I know there's a number of studies I've spoken about the Peterson study from 2018, and that was a really interesting one, just because it compared the average testosterone levels and graphed them by decade, and then matched them over the 80s, the 90s, and the noughties, and it makes for fascinating, if worrying, reading, just because, we can see a real substantial drop. It's not halved according to those figures that were collected in that study. But, we are looking at a very substantial, about a third drop over the course of those 2 decades. So, there is something up, and I do not think the solution is what we're currently running with, which is, well, why don't we just change the reference ranges and pretend it's not a thing? That doesn't feel, to me, like a good solution.
I may or may not agree with you there. I think it's obvious which one it is. When you mentioned testosterone and dopamine, that's fascinating to me, because dopamine is obviously like the motivation and drive element. And if testosterone is dropping, it makes me think, and this is not necessarily true, but I'm just drawing not conclusions, hypothesis here, that men and women in general went through a lot of hardship generations before us and seem to come out of that without any recorded mental health issues necessarily, not to the same extent as we have now. And testosterone plays into dopamine so much, and lack of dopamine would reduce drive, and then reduce drive, you have lack of fulfillment, one can assume, because you're less able to do things that maybe one would like to do because you have lack of motivation. And then you can see this cycle panning out as I'm picturing it now. What do you think there's any truth into something like that occurring, and do you see that in the people that you see now in clinic.
Well, yeah, and I think this is where it is relevant to dissect the arguments that are put forward, in the sense that you could put forward a very valid argument to say, well, look, lack of sleep, the average length of sleep has declined in that time. That has a very reliable effect of dropping testosterone like a rock. But then you could also put forward the role of vitamin D, magnesium status. You could put forward rationale about the overuse of antibiotics, the subsequent increase in the rate at which we all have dysbiosis in the intestinal microbiome. You could look at the amount of horrendous chemicals in our food supply, the lack of nutrients, the impact that has on the mitochondria, on insulin resistance, and a real big link there between testosterone levels. But yeah, so to that stress link, so to that dopamine link. Key thing there with dopamine is that it is the neurotransmitter that, while is often tagged as motivation, and it absolutely has a role to play there, its evolutionary purpose is very much to give us a little bit of a dose of pleasure in order that we carry on doing what we're doing and thus can improve our future status. So huge link there between the pursuit of food and sex, but equally the things that allow us easy access to those things, so social status and so on and so forth. So yeah, financial gain can be a huge motivating factor. Why? Because we get a dose of dopaminergic pleasure to tell us whatever we just did to win that win, do more of it. But it's so linked into doing.
Yes.
And so linked to doing things to improve our future status. Hence, we can easily see from an evolutionary basis straight away why there's such a big link to low energy status, insulin sensitivity issues, thyroid signaling, and dopaminergic activity. The body is designed to downregulate dopamine at times when it's trying to stay alive now. Why reward the investment of energy to improve your future status when, according to the other signals that the brain's receiving, there may well not be a future? So it's fascinating how in what we can dub a sick society, and I think that's kind of fair, that we would see dopamine become such a common issue. And it is a common issue, at least in the people that I'm seeing and I'm testing. Everyone who comes in has undergone an organic acids test without fail. And there are dopamine markers on that test. So it's not everyone, but it is a very, very common thing. So I can't really speak to how that may have been, say, 20 years ago, because I've only been doing this 17 years. But certainly there is, a separate question we could pose as to what's going on with our dopamine status. And it's fair to say that anybody on low dopamine status, well, we've got this inbuilt desire, inbuilt drive to try and correct it, even if it's only a temporary fix, even if that's having a great sugar rush, which gives us the dopamine, or whether it is doing a little bit swiping and a bit more swiping, getting a few more likes, whether it is that, need for some sort of hit. And we can see that play out in all corners of society. And you can't really consider dopamine without also considering its role on testosterone too, because it is such a strong link.
Yes. You mentioned social media there. It's a topic that I wasn't necessarily going to touch upon, but it's an interesting one nonetheless. Do you see that the state of dopamine status and maybe testosterone interplays, and this might be quite a complex question, I've never read anything on it, interplays with how social media use, essentially?
Well, I know that the social media companies have invested very heavily in the behavioral science, and yeah, a lot of their design features are very much predicated on inducing that dopamine rush in the users. We have to acknowledge that these are extremely well-funded teams that are using a lot of scientific principles to continually target users, which of course includes teenagers with developing minds. And I recall the phrase that was laid out many years ago to think, well, how are we considering the role that this is having in the development of immature nervous systems? Our brains continue to develop until the age of 25. So, would we leave a little bag of cocaine out on the kitchen table and tell our teenage children that, look, there's going to be hard days. And when you have a hard day, give yourself a little bump, take the edge off, just do what you need to do to have that moment, settle yourself, and then come to dinner. We wouldn't. And so it is that great example of a technology that nobody in 2004 would have ever predicted that this is how it would have played out. And it crept in so subtly to the point that it's just part of our life, and we often accept that now. But yeah, I think it is time to reconsider, well, what's going on? Because when I speak to people who do specialize in that area of more mental health on a society-wide level, they are often concerned about the individuals who are leaving the education system now. And the phrase that always stands out is, here is the first population that can't handle life. And of course, it's a massive generalization. I get to speak to a lot of young people who are eloquent and on the ball and very admirable. But we're talking about general patterns, and that does worry me.
It worries me too. Without making it
and I don't have a solution for it either.
Yeah. I mean,
and I think it's part of the problem as well, in the sense that, yes, it is contributing, but would we have so much of a problem caused by that if we had young people who were still very much hanging around with their friends in person, doing that thing which is considered so dangerous now, which is walking around 3 roads to knock on the door of your friends and then going around and kicking an actual ball on actual grass. It does feel like the less time children spend with their peers, the less free-range children that we've got, the less they are able to use their brains and develop in the way that nature had intended. And we can only expect consequences from that. And the consequences are everywhere. They're in front of our eyes, but they're not necessarily consequences that lend themselves to quantification. There's no easy number. And that seems to hold back the discussion to some extent. But yeah, how much of that ties into metabolic challenges, to changes in neurochemistry, the dopaminergic issues that we're talking about, and equally, how much does the junk food, the poor quality sleep, all of that blue light before bedtime, how is that then impacting on hormonal status and leaving them in need of further hits to boost the dopamine and to give them some sort of temporary balance that takes them through the day? These are more questions than they are answers, but they sound like it's a good time to ask the questions.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And even from personal experience, I've noticed that if I'm not motivated to do anything, I can scroll on my phone. I can scroll social media, and something that I now do at work because I have to, because I've recognized it's so addictive, and I'll do it without noticing, take my phone out of my pocket and scroll, is I just put it on airplane mode, put it in a drawer and leave it until it's needed. And people can call me on, we've got an instant messaging app.
Okay.
People can call me on there. That's absolutely fine. But they cannot, my social media isn't on, and they cannot, basically, or social media can't bombard me with these constant messages and updates and things of that nature, stuff which I'm not interested in. But,
lure you in.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And then I'm on
there. You're missing out.
That is it. That's how they do it. FOMO. It's a real thing.
It is a real thing.
It does drive that. On the topic of men's health, so you've mentioned testosterone is a huge interplay between different conditions and also dopamine. Is genetics a big part in that as well, in terms of the variability between testosterone dysregulation maybe and also dopamine?
So I wouldn't necessarily be looking into genetics as the first, second or third line when tending to testosterone. It's fair to say that there are multiple genetic issues that could potentially play a role with testosterone. And this is where anything that results in undue inflammation can have a massive role of testosterone. Anything that influences energy metabolism, that would certainly play a role. So to be specific on that one, we hear a lot about the genes like MTHFR. It is the hallowed favorite child of anyone who's done a 23andMe test. But what I think is probably most interesting is worthwhile touching on the BCMO gene. This is the beta-carotene monooxygenase gene, which turns carotenes from plants into retinol, which is to say real vitamin A that the body can use. And approximately 40% of the population have that mutation in the gene, which means it just doesn't work very well. Added to that, if you have any sort of disruption in the gut that impacts on bile release, or bile is a cofactor within the reaction. So even with people who do have the stronger genetic setup there, you're still probably not going to convert the carotenes into vitamin A very effectively. But nonetheless, here is a massive chunk of the population who, come what may, no matter what they do, no matter how they optimize their digestion or bile release, they're never going to be able to turn carotenoids from plants into real vitamin A. So, they have to eat the vitamin A, which means they have to eat liver, which of course wasn't a problem for generations because everybody did it, sometimes begrudgingly. But nonetheless, they did. But in the last 30, 40 years, suddenly it is now the norm to not eat liver. And you would anticipate that's going to have a whole host of negative effects on the population. And sure enough, we're seeing those exact things you'd expect. But I mention that because vitamin A is so relevant in regards to maintaining the membrane health, so very relevant at the gut lining, without which we are going to be leaving ourselves vulnerable to increased intestinal permeability. Suddenly, we're going to pay a big cost for any imbalances that are in the gut, because what would otherwise be constrained within the gut is no longer constrained and is now getting into the bloodstream. It's now interacting with our immune system, and it's causing a whole host of inflammatory reactions. On top of that, membrane health, mitochondria. What is very rarely touched on is how your mitochondria produces energy through creating an electrochemical gradient across a membrane. Now, what happens if the membrane health there is compromised? Energy production is compromised. So here's just two examples of systemic issues from one gene alone that hasn't been integrated into our thinking. And suddenly, we've got more inflammation, we've got lower energy production, both of which will have a devastating effect on testosterone. And there's further direct effects. Vitamin A, very important to allow for the production of IL-10, which is one of our Cytokines are immune system messengers, but this one promotes immunotolerance. This one dampens down overreaction. So yeah, that's just one aspect. So yeah, that demonstrates to me how these things can play a big role. But yeah, my thinking when it comes to any individual with low testosterone, I'm first looking at, okay, well, is there signs that inflammation is playing a role here? Is there any signs or any data from the test that shows that poor dopamine status is playing a role? What about insulin signaling? What about magnesium, zinc, boron, vitamin D? In any case, those will normally give me points that I can work backwards from. And one of those ways that I will end up working backwards will take me right back to the vitamin A. So yeah, it isn't one of the first questions I would ask, but absolutely can play a role.
Right. I see. I would love to come back to nutrients. But I would just like to touch upon when you mentioned clinical tests that you're looking at for dopamine status and through the organic acids test, and also testosterone status, because there's different forms, and sex hormone binding globulin also plays a role there, etc., and also the testosterone to estrogen ratio, etc., etc. It'd be good to look at what you're identifying and then maybe the reference range that you'd look for as well. And is that slightly different to what's on the panel?
So, yeah, when it comes to the most obvious test for is testosterone an issue or not, you're going to look at a blood test. Of course, it would normally follow some screening. For example, does this individual have poor focus, low mood? Do they have altered body composition? Have they become more doughy? Do they have lower red blood counts? Very few people link testosterone into erythropoiesis, that is the production of red blood cells, but it's a big thing. And so that's another area. Altered hair growth, sleep quality, reduced athletic output, reduced recovery, and of course, the most obvious one of all, sex drive. Yeah. So in those scenarios, that's where we would likely want to consider the role of testosterone. And so, there's two standard ways that we can do that testing, one of which would be good old blood testing. And of course, within that zone, you can get really basic insufficient testing. For example, sometimes I have people come to me who had their testosterone checked and it was okay. Why? Because they had a single measure of testosterone, which is almost useless. Or we can do a blood panel where we'll look at testosterone, but also dihydrotestosterone and estrogen. These are two hormones that testosterone can be converted into. And so sometimes we'll have a lower testosterone because it's being converted into one or both of these downstream hormones. But we'll also want to take a look at progesterone, prolactin, and we'll talk about why that's important. But also SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. If you've got too much sex hormone binding globulin, well, guess what? It binds to sex hormones and means they're just not available to do their job. Hence, you could have totally normal testosterone levels, and yet your free testosterone is on the floor, and you're having all of those symptoms that I mentioned. The other markers I'd look for in a blood test would be LH and FSH, so luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which represent the stimulation going from brain down to the testes. So this is where if you've got testosterone, you're going to look at a very different approach if this is due to poor stimulation to the testosterone, in which case we know the brain is not asking the testes to do the job. It doesn't want them to do the job right now, or potentially it can't. Versus a time when there's low testosterone with high DHT and high estrogen, which is to say there's enough stimulation, there's enough production, but it's leaking into other forms. So that would be a typical blood panel that I would look at. And to answer one of the questions you laid up there, it is categorically not about the reference range, because depending on the lab, you may well have a reference range of 9 to 30, or it could be 11 to 33 nanomoles per litre. But that is a range that represents 97.5% of all men. And that's all men regardless of their age. There's no age range that substratifies there. So you can have a 20-year-old male going into the doctor's office, and they've actually had this where he came back at 9.2 nanomoles per litre, which is so much lower than we'd want in a young man.
Yeah.
And the doctor says, it's kind of a shame it wasn't a bit lower, because if it was that bit lower, I could have helped you. But I can't. So, and that was that. And it really speaks to the absurdity of this reference range based approach. We may as well call it what it is, paint by numbers. If it's in, then it's okay. If it's out, it's not. So yeah, I would always want to see in any sort of youngish, healthy male, and of course, where do we stop being young? And when I was a teenager, I thought 37 was really, really old. I'm 37 now, so it turns out it's not. But yeah, I'd want to see it in the 20s. Now, if somebody was that much older, maybe in their 60s and the 70s, then it would be more circumstance specific. So if they're at middle of the teen, 15, 16, and they're feeling decent, great. Even if they're down at sort of 13, 14, but they were feeling okay, I'd probably not be inclined to go hunting for levers that we can deploy there to bump it up, unless they were really keen on doing so. But yeah, that's where I'd want it. 20s, 20-something sounds good to me, and that ties in very reliably with the sort of outcomes that we want. Feeling good, performing well, recovering quickly from exercise, and all of the rest of the things that come with it. So yeah, that would be the blood test. There's also the Dutch panel as well, which is a great test. You gain some things, you lose others.
Just to focus, there's a couple of areas that I'd like to touch upon there, but one of them is the test. Are you specifically looking at free testosterone for that 20s range?
Yeah. So that's what's going to be relevant for what we want to know. Now, the level of DHT and estrogen is also relevant too.
Yeah.
Well, again, the total testosterone helps to tell us, is there enough production? Are the testes getting the stimulation? Are they able to respond to that? So yeah, it's still relevant, but when it comes down to what's having an effect in this man's body, then it's the free hormones that are relevant, because if they're not free, they can't do the job. So that's where we'll always want to look at the whole picture. What's going on here, but then why? And it's when we ask that second question, that's when it's worthwhile, again, substratifying between those with low testosterone production versus those with good testosterone production, but immediate loss of that testosterone into either DHT or estrogen. And of course, depending on which one of those or both is occurring, that's when we'll see different pictures. We'll see a very different pattern in terms of how do they feel and what symptoms they're seeing.
Right, that's really good to know, because I know people, you can see this, people may have heard this if they're into the health and fitness, and steroid use can lead to gynecomastia, and that's because the huge increase in testosterone also increases aromatase, to my knowledge, which is the one, the enzyme which converts testosterone into estrogen. And
that's right.
Yeah.
So a lot of bodybuilders, but also other athletes, let's be honest. Not just bodybuilders who may make use of testosterone supplementation, if we can euphemistically call it that. So when you pump up the testosterone levels to especially high levels, there's more opportunity for that enzyme, the aromatase enzyme, to then convert it into estrogen. So that's why a lot of bodybuilders, athletes who are using anabolic steroids will also take aromatase inhibitor drugs to stop that from happening. And they'll often use that during the cycle and then as part of their post-cycle therapy. That being said, we can still see problems with higher levels of aromatase in men who aren't using exogenous sources of testosterone. And when we see that, that's a massive clue for one or both of two issues. One being insulin sensitivity.
Right.
And the other one being good old stress. So if you have excess insulin activity in those adipose cells, the fat cells, then that's where a lot of the estrogen is formed in a man's body, in those fat cells. And yes, obese men are much more likely to have low testosterone for this very reason. Their fat cells take the testosterone that's there, convert it into estrogen, and that estrogen is then released into circulation where it comes back to our brain, the hypothalamus, the manager of our entire hormonal status, and it shuts down the activity. It's that negative feedback loop, and estrogen is very powerful in doing that. Hence why the whole system goes into something of a slumber, and we have less testosterone as a result. So that's actually quite a common pattern with obese men. But equally, if there's that excess insulin output, while it actually increases testosterone in women via activities of the ovaries, in men, insulin and that excess insulin availability that we see then actually drives up estrogen because it switches on that aromatase enzyme at fat cells, and suddenly we have more estrogen, which does have a lot of protective roles in these challenging and potentially overwhelming situations. So it's not a faulty design by the body, as is always the case, it seems. But that's likely to not only drive up the likelihood of estrogen-linked issues, which typically center on sleep and agitation, but can very easily change body composition and potentially gynecomastia. That's where we can easily see this either through those insulin issues, but stress. It's typically never part of the discussion when we see this raised estrogen in men. In actual fact, the discussion is normally so centered on one question: what dose of resveratrol should I take? But resveratrol is great for a lot of things. It's just not good as an aromatase inhibitor. 90s bro science. Well, it doesn't always translate to the front line, and aromatase is a very good example of that.
Right. So two cases there. These are really good examples, actually, because it's making me think a person with a higher body fat percentage, it's almost a double whammy in a sense, because normally they're eating excess carbohydrates and therefore you've got that insulin signaling. But adiposity in and of itself increases estrogen production, to my knowledge. So you'd have that where you're getting, so even if you change your diet, so you may be spiking insulin less, but you're eating isocaloric to what you were before, you might not reduce the estrogen as much as you'd expect because you still got that increased in adiposity, spouting out inflammatory cytokines and estrogen, etc.
Well, and this is where this idea of you just need to eat less, it's calories in, calories out. Whilst it is technically true, it doesn't ever seem to pay any recognition to the two sides of that equation. What happens if you reduce calories by 40%? Your metabolic rate drops by 35%. So yes, you can force the body into losing a tiny little bit of fat, but at the cost of feeling awful, often having terrible sleep, poor brain function, reduced investment in detoxification, in digestion. So you're buying yourself a future of potential problems. Not only that, it's not likely to even help, because now the body is actually increasing its rate of fat storage enzymes, and it's trying desperately to ensure that when you do eventually crack from this unsustainable diet, and if you're human you will, then it's going to ensure that that excess that it's finally waited for is deposited in the areas that need it the most, that is the fat cells. This is your insurance policy, because if all of the environmental signals tell the central nervous system that starvation is now a material risk, it will do what it's designed to do and protect you against future starvation, which is a cool system. But yet, here we are, 160 years after the first dietary book ever put forward the hypothesis that maybe eating less is going to be the answer to obesity, or as it was called then, corpulence. So I prefer that word. But yeah, here we are. How many tens of billions of research dollars have been spent trying to get a single randomized controlled trial to show long-term benefits of calorie-controlled diets? Not one has ever managed to do it. The evidence is all around us. Just walk up and down a high street. Stand outside a Greg's, any one you want, because there's normally one every 100 meters, it seems. It's not working. But equally, at the same time, I think there's an opportunity to discuss, well, once obesity is present, once the fat cells have passed a certain threshold, you do now have a major disadvantage in resolving the metabolic challenges that come with that. Because, okay, you've got excess fat cells, so you've also got high levels of leptin, which will guarantee leptin resistance. Leptin is such an important signal to your hypothalamus, which also manages your energy budget, that it's not able to deliver its signal effectively. So suddenly, you now need to eat more for your brain to feel that it has enough energy to give permission for all the pathways and all the organ systems that need that energy. In other words, if you eat less, you will now force your body into a stressful state, and so you'll simply change the number of problems that we're getting. So this is where often having to undertake a full reset, remove all of the obvious obstacles, whether they be mitochondrial activity. You know, what if this individual has certain gut bacteria that mean they're now low in B2? Mm-hmm. Not normally a dietary thing when I find low B2. What if there's any inflammatory issues that are disturbing methylation in a way that now they don't form CoQ10 or carnitine? That's going to mess with them. What if that vitamin A thing that we spoke about? What if they're not eating the liver and they don't have the copper? They can't use oxygen effectively, so on and so forth. I've never met anybody who doesn't have multiple obstacles in this regard. So going into this challenge and then strapping a parachute on your back and trying to run forward, it's really hamstringing us to the point that, yeah, first let's take away those obstacles. And then let's actually acknowledge the self-perpetuating cycle that comes with obesity, because it is actually something that can be reliably and methodically deactivated. But it needs to involve a scenario where insulin levels are low and are kept low for a sustained period of time. Often it actually only needs about 12 weeks. But it will often take several months to tend effectively to the obstacles that allow us to get there. Stress. Adrenaline pushes up blood sugar levels very effectively. And guess what follows that? Insulin. Guess what follows that? Fat storage. Guess what follows that? More leptin. We've got multiple factors contributing. You mentioned the role of inflammation. and how fat cells, turns out they're not just this passive storage site for energy. They're metabolically active. They are a key component of our immune system. And especially if there's abdominal fat, well, nobody seems to ever talk about these things like IL-7, the way that will induce excess activity at the thymus to the point that we not only have too much inflammatory cytokines, but we also have too much anti-inflammatory cytokines working against one another in a way that keeps people in a low-grade inflammatory state all the time, with no ability to actually win the wars that are needed, but no opportunity to have the anti-inflammatory cytokines do what they want to do and bring peace. So they're constantly stuck in the middle of that cycle. Either way, I could go on and name all the various different zones that are contributing, but we need to take care of stress and blood sugar level impacts of that. We need to take care of any factors that influence thyroid signaling, specifically that conversion of T4, the inactive hormone, into T3, the active one, which I believe you have a podcast on that. And that's sleep, that's inflammatory events, that's infections, that's anything that impacts on your energy budget. But then also, to tend to that insulin status, which is easily done with a ketogenic diet. It's not the only way to do it, but often it's by far and away the quickest and the simplest, even though it is unappealing to many, which I understand.
Yeah, I understand that. It's definitely is a problem socially sometimes, I think. Having tried it a few times, I quite like it, the way it makes me feel. But I think, if you're going out for a meal, your options can be very limited. It's not impossible.
This is it. Yeah, it's never impossible, but it is often inconvenient. And of course, it depends on where you go, and it depends on what's on the menu, who you're with. Obviously, I always want to be aware that my world is likely going to be slightly different in that regard. I will sometimes eat keto, I'll sometimes eat carb-based. On a standard week, I'll typically be spending some days in a ketogenic state. Other weeks, not at all. Depends more so on how am I training, and if I'm playing football, then I'm carbing for that. But nonetheless, I recognise that doing what I do, most of my friends don't ever really want to ask me, why are you ordering that? Why are you eating that? Because they don't want to hear the lecture.
Yeah.
And that's fine. So they don't ask and I don't tell.
Yeah, that's true. But I love trying new things. And to your point before, in terms of dietary strategies, I remember reading a study, the Diet Fits study, which I can link to. And basically it just identifies, it tried a low carb diet and then a high carb, low fat diet. So low carb, high fat, and also high carb, low fat. Did I say that right? Yes. Always get them confused. And what they basically found is that nearly comparable results in terms of weight loss. Low carb is a little bit better, I think, but in terms of triglyceride levels dropping, etc., as you'd probably expect on most people in this field. But just identify that it doesn't really matter which diet you follow as long as you can follow it, right? Because the people who dropped out, and therefore probably didn't lose much weight or any weight at all. And it just basically says to me that it needs to be individualized, right, for that person. And for me, I figured out that I respond well to higher protein, and I don't like intermittent fasting as much as other people, so I might do it a couple of days a week, but I respond well to longer fasts, 24 hours, 36 hours, maybe. Dinner 2, and then 24 hours, and then the extra 12 until breakfast the following day. And I can do that relatively easy. But intermittent fasting, I tend to lose a bit of focus there. Don't know why. But it's the point of individualizing it to yourself.
Well, it is. And it just speaks to this huge and increasing problem that comes with blind acceptance of the evidence-based medicine model. And of course, on the surface, who could possibly be against the use of evidence? Fortunately, that's not what evidence-based medicine actually is. Yes, it relates to the use of evidence, but there is a very specific hierarchy in the evidence, which is to say that if there have been multiple traditional healing systems that have been built up over many thousands of years, with the tradition refined generation by generation, and these multiple healing systems from various different corners of the globe have all come to the same conclusion that, you know, a particular herb will be ideal for a particular problem. They never met one another, and yet they've all come to that same conclusion. Well, unfortunately, that does not count in evidence-based medicine, because that is based on the practitioner's experience. There is absolutely no accounting for what has been working for us for a long time. And of course, I think there's, you know, philosophical discussions that can be had there. There can be weaknesses. We can end up tricking ourselves. We can find that actually it was the ceremonial event that led up to the delivery of that herb that were actually key. But I digress. If it's consistently working in all these environments, do we just want to throw out that knowledge? That's one. But possibly the biggest problem of all comes from the way that this is a frequentist approach. That is to say, it is underpinned by the belief that as long as we do enough sampling, as long as we get a big enough sample size, we will overcome sampling error, and we will be able to determine the one true effect of this intervention. Input versus output. The most frequent response is the correct one. And so, yeah, they'll average that out. And so what you end up finding, if there's a group of 12 people, 4 of them saw this intervention spike their insulin, 4 of them saw it reduce their insulin, 4 of them saw no change. Well, on average, it does nothing, even though it can have a massive effect in 2/3 of people involved in the trial. But on average, the effect was close to 0. And thus, it is considered that this intervention does not have any effect on insulin, when that was blatantly untrue for the majority of people enrolled in that very trial. So, yeah, this is a big problem in the sense that, yeah, intermittent fasting, you mentioned that, it's a fantastic tool, one that is very reliable in inducing autophagy, that process of cellular rejuvenation, the recycling process. Let's get rid of the old mitochondria and get new shiny ones. That's great.
Purge senescent cells and that kind of thing. And
yeah,
I actually
exactly.
misspoke before, because I meant time-restricted eating during the week. I don't necessarily do well on, but intermittent fasts, yeah. That's the one that
and it's a very valid tool. And yet a lot of people, certainly a lot of people that I see who are looking to do it, are really enthusiastic about the benefit. To maybe one of their friends has done it and has noticed feeling better, brighter, sharper, has come back with these positive reports. But if your energy systems are compromised, if your stress response is overactive, you haven't got access to this effective detoxification process. No matter what you do, you'll still get the stress of intermittent fasting. So that balance between, moderate stress, substantial benefit, which may well be the case for your metabolically healthy neighbor. Well, if you have any challenges in those areas, well, you may have an exaggerated cost, big stress, and near zero benefit. And that's where, we've got to recognize that these studies tell us very interesting things, and they give us great proof of concept of how certain interventions can be leveraged for the outcomes we want. But we still need to recognize the mechanism. And if that mechanism requires that we've got a certain amount of resources, or if that mechanism is shut down by excessive inflammatory cytokine activity, or if it requires cofactors that just aren't available, then it would be naive to just try and deploy it on the basis that, it improved insulin sensitivity by 90%. No, it did that on average in the group that was studied.
Yeah.
So not a single one of the group studied actually saw a 19% drop. Not one of them did. And equally, they're entirely unrepresentative in many cases. So, yeah, that's my point. Just because, again, to lead this back to testosterone, we know that low calories is one of the easiest ways to drop testosterone to the floor. Mm-hmm. Your nutritional state is so important there. And the two big factors there is fat intake, especially saturated fat intake, and total calorific intake. So, there's one study from actually only a couple of years back that saw as soon as individuals reduced their calorific intake, and it was 13 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass, as far as I recall, there was a substantial drop in the luteinizing hormone, that hormone that's sent to stimulate the testes. And I remember another study on bodybuilders which showed that their leptin and testosterone status took months to recover post-competition, which of course is one of the best examples we're going to see of sustained and intense dieting. Mm-hmm. Weight loss will always increase SHBG. So we need to bear these in mind because so often people end up with these collection of pet ideas that, okay, I want higher testosterone, so I'm going to slam 50 milligrams of zinc every night before bed. P.S. Never do that. I'm also going to focus on the vitamin D. I'm going to get the red light shine out of my balls. All of the rest of it. And they're like, I also want to do intermittent fasting because, I want to get shredded, and that seems like it's good for mitochondria and weight loss and all this. And they're not coherent. So this is where we need to assess what are the obstacles that are in place in each individual. And of course, if that's relating to testosterone, then let's start with the big ones. Energy signaling, massive. Inflammation, massive. Dopamine, that's a big deal. Stress, nutritional status, and that would be where I would begin. And if we actually do any sort of reasonable digging in those areas, we're going to come away with a very clear picture of, where will the victory be won in this individual? We can now start building a customized plan. But this idea of this is good, so do that, very flawed.
Yes, of course. I completely agree with you there. And it was interesting what you said about calorie restriction, because I definitely recognize when I was younger, I didn't know a lot about nutrition then. I got into nutrition partly, not completely, but partly due to aesthetic purposes. Wanted to look good naked. Essentially the reason, right?
Solid aim.
Vanity. So high protein, low fat, low carb. That is not very good for anything unless you just want to get really lean. I don't recommend that to anyone. But I recognize now what I was doing, and my dopamine, my motivation and drive was non-existent. And I think my testosterone must have been extremely low because I was experiencing a lot of the things that we have spoken about today as well in my teenage years. And I look back now, it's like, I wish someone could have told me what I was doing,
Well, is that not a sign that you have learned something important?
Yes, exactly. And hopefully this podcast will help people if they're in that situation, or someone can pass it on. You mentioned food and nutrients, and it'd be good just to touch upon those. And I wanted to bring up something because you just jogged my memory. We talked about magnesium, zinc, what are good ones here? Selenium. And I think iron probably is involved within that as well. But these are all blocked, in a sense, by anti-nutrients in food. And these anti-nutrients come from plants. And what's pushed now is a plant-based diet. I'm just wondering if there is something there, and I've not looked into this, but this is something, I'm just sharing you ideas as they come into my head.
You say that because I have. So, yeah, it is definitely.
That was not planned, by the way. Can I just say that?
Yeah, it is definitely the case that I have worked with a lot of individuals over the years who are on either a plant-based diet, as in only plants, as in vegan. But also what I would call plant-based, which is based on plants, but also has a little bit of other things as well. And the interesting thing is, I would hypothesize that individuals who are metabolically healthy, that don't have that BCMO mutation or anything else that would compromise the key nutrients, I would hypothesize that you can maintain good health on a vegan diet. Although it is important to share that, having trialed the protocols that I use with a lot of vegan individuals, I've never seen anyone recover from poor health on a vegan diet. And of course it makes sense in that, even if we look at, say, fatty acids, you are depending on the plant form of these fatty acids each and every time you're looking at a vegan diet. They need to be converted into the EPA, the DHA, and that's fine. We've got enzymes to do that, but how efficient are they? They'll vary from one person to the next, and they are less efficient in men. But they also depend on a whole number of cofactors, which is a lot of minerals, especially magnesium. But thyroid activity is a really big deal. Now, thyroid signaling will almost always be compromised in any individual with a metabolic challenge. And that's not to say that their thyroid gland is a problem. Normally it's absolutely fine. But there are so many ways that T4, the inactive hormone, can then stutter in being converted into T3, the active hormone. Poor sleep, any change in mitochondrial activity, stress, inflammation. Now, these are the real centerpieces of any long-term health challenges. So, yeah, straight away, can we expect good conversion into the right levels of fatty acids? No, but equally, I offer that as an example because there's so many ways in which the body recycles and recovers a lot of the minerals and vitamins that it uses. But those very same pathways are going to suffer when the body is desperately trying to survive the day rather than invest in future health. So, yeah, what's that going to do to the vitamin A, the B12, the zinc, the iron, the copper, the choline, the creatine, carnitine, carnosine, CoQ10, taurine, methionine, glycine, calcium, vanadium, chromium, iodine, those fatty acids, plus stearic acid, sphingolipids. There's a lot there that is difficult to make up. But to go back to one really easy to grasp concept, saturated fats. Saturated fats are a really, really big deal when it comes to testosterone. All fats seem to be highly relevant, but saturated fats in particular, because unlike the polyunsaturated fats, they actually tend to linger in the bloodstream for longer. Hence why we have better satiety from eating saturated fats. And there's a good study with children who put butter on their potato versus other options, and suddenly they were satisfied for longer. But yeah, that's one of many studies that shows that. But yeah, saturated fats are so key because they don't enter fat cells so well. And that means they linger in the bloodstream much more effectively, which is one of the reasons why nutritional scientists suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect back in the 70s and 80s thought that, saturated fats are bad because they boost cholesterol. Well, yes, they do boost cholesterol for two reasons. One, they're not going straight into the fat cells with the same ease that polyunsaturates do. And two, they're not being oxidized in the same way. So you're not getting the same level of oxidized cholesterol. Imagine if you've had a ton of sunflower oil, you'll get a little bit of cholesterol and you'll get a lot of oxidized cholesterol. Eat the same amount of butter, you get minimal oxidized cholesterol and a higher level of cholesterol. Why do the arguments suggest that cholesterol's bad and we need to avoid it? Because it's not bad. It can be if it converts into oxidized cholesterol. That's a potential problem. But here is this idea that says eating saturated fats is bad because it pushes your cholesterol up. And cholesterol's bad because it could turn into oxidized cholesterol. We're already there with the polyunsaturates. But they said, but it's not driving up the precursor in the same way. So it must be better for you, right? Yeah. But I digress. Having that fat around in the bloodstream for longer, that's why you can get a better increase in cholesterol, because there's more energy available. The liver can access more energy, but that means more energy is arriving at the liver, and thus it is well satisfied, and it no longer has to deploy this energy recovery process, which is where we see SHBG levels rise to just dampen down on all testosterone or testosterone-linked behavior. So yeah, that was a few different angles that I ran around with. Yep. But yeah, saturated fats are massively important for health, and this idea that they were good for us for the first 399,000 years of human evolution, but they became unhealthy in 1970 is absurd. Plus, look at the correlations. Correlation is not causation. This is very important. But as soon as we started eating more polyunsaturates and dropping down the amount of saturates, what happened? Exactly what you'd expect. People's metabolisms started getting slammed. Is there a single study that proves that a saturated fat in the normal levels that humans have consumed for a long period of time has any negative health effects? No, there never will be. You can get some sort of obscure links. It was associated with having a Mercedes is associated with living longer.
But there's plenty of meta-analysis which have debunked that now. Even the association. You'll find one study which there's several studies which show it, but there's many more that don't.
Exactly, and you can find these correlations. Even
cholesterol studies are. We're going to go off on one here, but even cholesterol studies are so mixed, and it normally depends on what the dogma was at the time. Because people always talk about the weight of the evidence, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're always looking at through the evidence through one lens, right, you're always going to see the same thing. And in areas like Hong Kong, for example, with the highest meat consumption per capita and one of the highest saturated fat consumptions, they don't have these risks of heart disease. They have actually extreme longevity, one of the highest life expectancies in the world. And they eat something like 2 pounds per person a day of meat. Like, you just can't.
You never get to hear about that.
Well, that's the thing. And it perplexes me that we talk about it as if it's the only way to health. And it's not. And for some reason, it's getting better now, but we don't mention about what you might have with the saturated fat, which is the portions of chips fried in seed oils. You know what I mean? So if you're having a steak, a ribeye, higher in saturated fat than most meats, let's say. Sounds very good. But chips next to it. And we look at the steak as the villain here, but not necessarily the chips.
Well, exactly. There's those studies which show. I remember commenting on one study in the Daily Mail, misquoted me somewhat, which is weird for such a respected journalistic organisation such as the Daily Mail, who weirdly haven't asked for my comments at any point in the last couple of years. Weird that. This was on a study which showed an association between those who responded to a survey to say that they'd had an average of 2 servings of red meat per day or more versus those that had low consumption. No attempt to separate. Is that McDonald's? Because that's red meat.
Processed meat.
Or is that grass-fed steak with broccoli?
Yeah.
Which would be a very different matter. And I mean, I think there's also the publication bias. I mean, there's that. The absolute ridiculous nature of the Eat Lancet report in 2019, which was then the platform to go lockstep with that Game Changers documentary, if we can call it a documentary. It was more entertainment than
I'm gonna have
anything
to
else.
pull out the LDL cardiovascular disease Game Changers on a different podcast, because we
won't go into there. But yes, it was very, very relevant in that they spent all these hundreds of pages building a report without providing any evidence that meat or saturated fat was actually bad for us.
But a lot of pretty pictures.
There were some good graphics, yeah. So and great PR.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a bizarre time to be alive when it comes to dietary recommendations. Are these the people that we want to be making recommendations? And do we think that destroying entire ecosystems to get those grains out of the ground, poisoning various species with the pesticides, the fungicides, the herbicides, and the fish due to the runoff, driving out voles and all the other animals into the arms of predators elsewhere, killing off all the topsoil through the tilling that nobody seems to want to talk about because we want a black and white solution here? Should we do all that in order to grow the inputs for lab grown meat, which still requires energy, guys?
Yeah, where
you can't get energy out of nothing. Yeah, it still has to eat. Or grass-fed regenerative agriculture, put carbon dioxide, nitrogen back into the soil, protect ecosystems. Yeah, the only downside is that multinational corporations don't actually get to control everything that we eat. I don't see that as a downside, not for us. But again, we could go off on that for all day. But
yeah, I will actually link to, because this might be new to some people, so I will link to the regenerative agriculture farm that I know of, White Oak Pastures, in the show notes, and they show how they can sequester more carbon in their burger, for example, compared to a Beyond Meat burger. And there's various other things, and how
we've got to say there is a use for the Beyond Burger if somebody wants to A, damage the environment, B, enrich corporations, and C, damage their own health. Well, now they can do it in just one meal, and that would be the Beyond Burger.
I'm not going to comment.
If they want to come at me, well, you know what, they can. It's just I believe in common sense and science, and as much as people often like to say, and for good reason, but there's so much conflicting studies out there. Yeah, who's paying for the conflict where it's so evident that human beings have done all right for the first 400,000 years of evolution? We've got a decent blueprint. Now let's actually look at quantifying different areas and expand our knowledge so that we can better apply it to the various individuals that need it. We just don't need an experiment that has no evidence behind it, that makes no sense, but just so happens to enrich the same people that have been responsible for the change in food recommendations in 1970. How did that go, guys?
We're digging a hole here that we're not going to escape from.
Okay.
We have,
grabbing a ladder, moving on out.
We are coming up on time. We talk a lot, don't we? I do love it, though.
Words are good.
Yeah, words are good. And I feel this is almost venting, so it's very therapeutic for me.
Good. Likewise.
One thing that I wanted to touch upon just before we wrap up was nutrients. And we have spoken about specific nutrients already, but like you said before, quite rightly, is it depends on the context of which you're looking at them. So if someone's not deficient in zinc, you give them more zinc, it's not necessarily going to increase their testosterone levels or any other hormones, for example. But there are studies to show that if you've got more zinc utilized by the body, for example, athletes, we've seen professional athletes, they are maybe excreting more minerals, using more minerals up in biochemical processes, and then they use something like ZMA, zinc, magnesium, vitamin B6. You get an increase in testosterone and things of that nature. And you mentioned stress before, and I'm just going to fire loads of things at you now, and then you can comment. You mentioned stress before, and I've read many studies now where they look at ashwagandha and KSM66 type ashwagandha in particular. I know there's sensoril, but I actually don't know any data on that one, unfortunately. But the KSM66 seems to be good at improving not only testosterone, but reducing cortisol as well. And I'm wondering if there's anything in particular that you see to be efficacious with very low risk for people which are maybe looking for a starting point where they can explore with a practitioner.
So yeah, it often comes down to that initial assessment. What are the obvious obstacles? So if we undertake that first appointment, I'll always have that organic acids test. So certainly that can flag up certain shortages. Let's touch on zinc. If somebody's short on zinc and they're aiming to boost their testosterone levels, there's not going to be many things that will be more successful or spectacular as correcting that zinc shortage. And this is something that has been known for quite some decades and has potentially been misappropriated, just in the sense that, there's studies going back to the 90s that if you supply zinc to zinc-deficient men, their testosterone doubles. So that's massive. But it has been extrapolated sometimes to mean that zinc doubles testosterone. And that's not quite the case. If somebody's already got decent levels of zinc, and if they are eating what we would consider to be a normal Western diet, which includes regular meat intake, they're getting enough meat. So they get enough zinc. So now the only consideration is, are they digesting it well? Most people are, but of course it's still possible that zinc isn't being absorbed effectively. Decent diet, decent digestion. I'm not expecting any problems with zinc. But we can test that anyway, and it is one of the markers on Genova's organic acids test, so we can get that quantification right from the very start. If somebody's got decent levels of zinc and they supplement it, especially at high doses, what they're going to do is increase the production of a zinc-dependent protein called metallothionein. Metallothionein serves a lot of positive benefits in the body, but one of the things it does, it binds up minerals. It's very useful, crucial, in fact, if anybody's trying to do any sort of heavy metal detoxification. But it will also bind up copper on its way into the body. In other words, high dose zinc, when you don't need it, is the most effective way to induce a copper deficiency. And it happens a lot. And so this is where, what happens when you're low on copper? Well, you can't use iron properly. You can't move it around the body the way that you should. Your neurotransmitter balance, including dopamine, is affected. Equally, what's the primary role of copper in the body? It is to use up oxygen. So everywhere that oxygen is used, you will see a role for a copper-dependent protein. So this is where suddenly oxygen metabolism can be affected, and with it goes mitochondrial function. Now, with it goes the ability of the mitochondria to take the energy out of the bloodstream and turn it into ATP, the currency that our bodies want. So not only do we lose energy, but also we're not able to gobble up the energy from the bloodstream. What happens there? What has to happen there is the cell induces insulin resistance to stop there from being this build-up of highly reactive energy molecules in the mitochondria, which of course We don't want this massive build-up of highly reactive energy molecules at any of these super vulnerable places. So, yeah, insulin resistance. And suddenly this is where these attempts to drive up testosterone have actually done the opposite, because insulin resistance is one of the best ways to crash testosterone. So that's where, if you're going to use zinc, first consider, do you need it? And if you're not sure, you can test it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's relatively cheap to test, actually, if you're doing it as a one-off.
Yeah, definitely. 20-something pounds for a serum zinc test. And admittedly, that needs contextualizing.
Yeah, I was just going to say I wouldn't recommend it as a one-off, but...
Yeah, because if you've got poor cortisol activity or issues with cortisol sensitivity, you may well find that actually that metallothionein protein I mentioned isn't being produced so effectively, and the zinc now rises. You get an artificial rise in the levels. It would appear that it's fine when it's actually not. Same goes for excessive oxidative stress. It will spill the zinc off that protein that's meant to hold it, and that can artificially drive up as well. There's an article on that on my website, but yeah, there are ways that we can contextualize that. Looking at some liver markers can be really helpful there as well. Looking at some of the organic acid markers, which isn't measuring zinc directly, it's measuring zinc activity. So we can build an accurate picture quite easily.
That makes perfect sense. In terms of, like, I mentioned ashwagandha before, is that something which you feel has utility in? So,
yes, it's a very valid option. It wouldn't be one of my first choices, but ultimately anything that's going to reduce the activation of the stress response is arguably the most powerful step that most people can take to boost testosterone. So in that regard, if you take 20 people in that study and 4 of them get a good response to ashwagandha, the average response is statistically significant. It boosts testosterone according to evidence-based medicine. And it most definitely can do. If you have a fairly functional stress response, but you're actually been under a bigger load of late, those are the people that tend to do very well with ashwagandha. So typically these are people who are generally healthy, but maybe they're studying for exams, maybe they're athletes coming up to competition, maybe it's end of quarter and they're having to stay behind at work. Whatever it is, they're feeling the effects of their stress. That's a time when I would expect ashwagandha to do a great job. If, on the other hand, somebody has been thoroughly dysregulated and they've had all these complex chronic issues over the last decade, I don't hold much hope for ashwagandha touching the sides. So yeah, that's again, it's one of those very valid things. But ultimately, this would be another example of me working backwards. If we can see all manner of dysregulation on an adrenal stress profile, we can measure heart rate variability and see that there's this massive fight and flight response that's kicking in at all times. Well, straight away, we can see that this individual is never going to have a fair chance of responding the way they should to all of those other things that we've discussed, unless they tend to the stress response, which of course then creates the next important question: what do they need to do? Now, if it's just a case that they're sleeping 3 hours a night, they're not eating till 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and they're working all hours that God sends, well, we know what we need to do. Just remove that. But sometimes it is going to be that we need to take a look at the physiology. If you've had long-term burdens on the system, your stress response been overactive for years and years, well, we'll automatically expect that we'll have down regulation of those cortisol receptors. We may well also then lose the effect that cortisol has on protecting us from inflammation, protecting our mitochondrial performance in the midst of all of this metabolic chaos. Suddenly, we're actually now got dysregulated inflammation, insufficient energy, the very things that the adrenal cortex needs to produce more cortisol, and thus we often need to intervene heavily with potentially lifestyle changes, sleep support, inflammatory control. But on the front line, licorice root to support cortisol availability, Korean ginseng to support cortisol sensitivity, the response to that. And yeah, often people would ask me, but doesn't cortisol have negative effects on testosterone? Well, yeah, it does have a limiting effect in that you'll never see optimal levels of cortisol never see optimal levels of testosterone while the cortisol levels are high. But you can't recover from a major stress without that cortisol. It is a hormone that helps us handle stress and recover from stress. So when people call it the stress hormone, it's such a misleading title. And so often we need phased support to support that cortisol during the transition, at which point we can now remove it and enjoy the new state of play where these self-perpetuating cycles have been deactivated. And most importantly, that stress response is not stuck in the on position, which we're not talking about limiting testosterone when that's the case. We're talking about deleting testosterone.
Yes.
And that's why, yeah, it's important not to be scared of adrenal support when it comes to tending to these stress challenges that people have. Because if that is part of the picture, and it so often is, then all of these other things will be useless or limited.
Right.
So we need to accept that optimal testosterone isn't feasible for several months. But what we can do is use these tools at our disposal to allow that individual to see the improvements they're after. That is to say, remove the obstacles and let their body do what it's designed to do. At which point we can take away that adrenal support and enjoy the fruit of that labour, which is to say a fair chance at producing optimal testosterone, which may happen automatically, or it may be a case that now we can provide them with the boron and they'll respond.
Yes.
Or maybe we'll take these anti-inflammatory steps and they'll respond, or we'll support dopamine effectively and they'll now respond, whereas they would never have had that fair chance upon that first meeting.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And just to bring an example to what you've mentioned, I remember at university, so I remember I'd be in my early 20s, and doing many all-nighters because I'm one of those people, well, I was one of those people that did everything last minute. And stress effectively, temporarily, basically neutered me. Our libido crashed. And that makes perfect sense with what you were saying.
Well, it does. If you provide a situation that forces the body to really channel its resources into one area that is now prioritized and must be prioritized at a time when the lack of sleep, the increased stress, the poor quality eating, I assume, is limiting the pool of resources in the first instance, well, it will do exactly what it's designed to do. Find a way to economize on its resources. And it turns out that going out hunting and competing for mates and everything else that comes with that is not a means to save energy. It's actually very energy intensive. And I'm sure that those individuals that still inhabit the bars of Covent Garden every weekday evening, they'll tell you the same. It's an energy intensive process to go out and browse and attempt to engineer a certain outcome. So it makes sense that would get switched off if you force the body into economy mode.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think you've explained those processes really well for, I think, practitioners and people that have an active interest in this field. And there's one more thing, and then we're going to completely close. Have you heard of any research with Tonga Ali?
Yes, aka Malaysian ginseng. So I must say it has been many, many years since I even looked at it. And the reason why so many years have gone by that I had, without looking at it again, is because I was not impressed by it. And neither have I heard of anyone introducing it and seeing the responses thereafter. Now, of course, that's not to say that it's not going to do the job. And as I've touched on many times so far, there's so many occasions where people will trial a particular item, be it tonka, ali, or one of the various ginseng options, or potentially some of those other herbs that are deemed to be testosterone boosting. And the key thing is, do they have a fair chance of seeing a response?
Yes.
So that's why, I'm aware that the research was not particularly impressive. Exactly why that was, I don't remember. So I'm not writing it off, but neither has there ever been any circumstantial patterns that I've observed that would call me to look at that and try and squeeze some benefits out of it.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So, Marek, this has been a roller coaster, I feel, of things that we've spoken about, as well as men's health, and really focusing on testosterone. I think this is a very robust podcast, but we'll get some feedback, and I will feed back to you.
Yeah, exactly. Let's put it to the people.
But this has been...
to make a podmocracy.
Yeah, but this has been great, at least for me. Hopefully you too.
It's been nice to going through all of these things. I enjoyed every single tangent we took, and we took plenty of them.
Yes.
So hopefully managed to wrap that back into a complete package that people can take away and use.
Yes, and I will link to your website, Instagram, all social media, articles that you mentioned as well as papers that we have spoken about too. But just before you go, can you please let us know what is the most impactful health change that you have made in your life and why?
Oh, okay.
Put you on the spot there.
I'm prepared for this. Okay, most impactful change. I'm going to say take magnesium before you go to bed.
Yeah, you're not the
first. There's about a dozen
that
I was tempted to go with, but we want a simple takeaway. And if you're not doing that, then there are circumstances in which that won't have an impact. But I've got to say, of the times that real human beings have come back to me to say, this really changed my life, magnesium has probably featured more heavily on that list than any other.
Which form?
So there's a lot of good forms. Most of the chelated forms are very decent. Magnesium oxide is rubbish. Avoid that at all costs, unless you're trying to induce bowel movement. That's a different thing. But magnesium glycinate would probably be the one that I use most commonly, by far away the most common that I use.
Brilliant. This is it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. I'll link to everything like I suggested, and I hope that we can do this again soon.
Oh, let's definitely do that again. I'll sign off for now.
Thank you for listening to the Functional Health Podcast. You can find links to everything that we talked about today in the show notes. If you have a second, please consider leaving a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does make a huge difference and helps get this valuable information out and reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date and know whenever I release a new episode. You can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, and all questions are welcome. As always, thanks to Josh Aurelia for all the editing, and thank you all for your support.